What an exciting morning so far. So I'm going to, I guess, dovetailing on that theme of pioneering a little bit, I'm going to talk about what's been pioneered in stroke thrombectomy and a little bit of an update on where things currently are. But first, I just want to, again, welcome everyone. These stroke intervention schools are really for you. They're to get excited about stroke treatment, all the great things that are happening, to go back to your centers and get your team going. So please take advantage of this opportunity. Everyone is here to share their knowledge. We all want to help one another. So it's great to be back with the S.I.S team here. I've had the privilege of being involved in these stroke intervention schools over the 5 years that they've been doing them here. And like I said, it's just a great opportunity for all of you. So thank you for coming and enjoy your time in Kenta. So yeah, we all know in stroke world that 2015 really was a historic year. It marked when 5 New England Journal of Medicine published trials really changed the standard of care for stroke treatment, that large vessel occlusion stroke patients need to get to thrombectomy. And so that was a very, very important year for us. I think even the people that were involved in these trials, I was involved in the trials, we didn't expect to find that the treatment effect was one of the most powerful treatment effects that's been discovered in medical history. And so if you compare it to a heart attack, a STEMI, the number needed to treat for STEMI is 1 in 17. The number needed to treat in stroke is 1 in 2.6. So it is an amazing, amazing treatment where opening the blocked blood supply to the brain obviously is a good thing for our stroke patients. But there have been many hurdles over the years to deliver this treatment. And so that's some of the things at the stroke intervention school. You have the opportunity to come and say, okay, in my program, here are some of the barriers of getting those stroke patients to that treatment. And so that's what we've been spending time over many years trying to figure out how we can bring down some of those barriers and hurdles. The first thing, I'm just going to go back. One of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit this morning is the areas that we're doing new techniques. So kind of we've been stretching how we treat patients and then who we treat. So there's been an expansion in the patient selection for stroke thrombectomy. So as we all know, there's many different ways that we can do these stroke intervention procedures. We have many, many tools. Many people are developing lots of new medical devices. We see that we have a very big list of our industry sponsors that are in attendance here at the meeting. So we have, basically some clot pluckers, devices, stent retrievers, et cetera, that are going to mechanically hold onto clot and remove it. Or we have a whole bunch of aspiration catheters that are the clot suckers that can try to remove clot by vacuuming it out. So there's a little bit of a catheter wars, and we have a lot of selection. It can basically get us a little bit in this state where, okay, well, what do I use as a treater to perform my thrombectomy procedure? And so, if you simplify it, there's really, if we have tools that can mechanically remove clot or perform an aspiration, we could do a stent retriever alone type of technique. We can do an aspiration only technique called ADAPT, or we could do a combined approach to remove the clot. So then when we say that at any of these stroke intervention schools, then people say, well, what's the best technique? What should I use as my front line? And so we have, of course, data, and people share their experiences, and I would strongly encourage you, when you're doing your work at your program, to keep your data, keep track of your cases, share that with the world. This paper says basically that an aspiration frontline approach is the best way to go. This paper says a combined approach is the best way to go. This paper says kind of combined approach, stent retriever is the best way to go. So it can be a little confusing, I think, in this day and age. It's not so much an argument. We're very fortunate and blessed as this field has matured to have many, many good strategies of how we remove clot. And if you look at it, I'm not going to go through this in a lot of depth. I just show this to say that if you compare aspiration with a mechanical removal of a clot, basically they're pretty equal. There's not much difference between any of the things that we measure, patient outcomes, revascularization rates. It's pretty much on par. So the things that we think about, safety, they're both really equally as safe. You see almost identical mortality rates, identical symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage rates. So I'd tell operators, when you're thinking what to use as your frontline strategy, kind of think of these 4 F's. I mean, is it first rate? We want to obviously offer our patients something that is effective and works, and we're not compromising on their outcome, and so that's an important way. But we just showed that the data that basically most approaches are going to give you a similar opportunity to have a good outcome. Is it safe? We went through that they're very comparable in safety. So then the last two, I think, do play an important role. Time, so what is maybe my fastest way to achieve a good outcome? And then cost. And cost is an important decision maker, as we know, all over the world. So on the timing side, often we find from the studies we've done that going with an aspiration frontline strategy is probably a little faster than having to deploy a device and do a mechanical extraction. So most times aspiration is a faster approach, and it's also a cost-effective approach. The cost of devices, as we know, is adding in a stent retriever can often mean about a $4,000 to $5,000 increase in the cost. So with aspiration kind of procedures, we know that the tools and the catheters have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger in their ID, or the size of the straw, I like to say, that can remove the clot. And in this day and age, we're now into what they call the super large bore catheters. And so these are catheters that previously we would have never dreamed that a 6 French catheter was being delivered to an M1 in a brain vessel. That would have been impossible, but with the good engineering technology we have today, that is what is happening. And Dr. Schaff, Professor Schaff, is going to share tomorrow a little bit of his experience using some of those super large bore catheters that are of an 0.88 internal diameter size, and we're even going beyond that now. There's some new catheters coming out that are 0.92. So we'll hear more and learn more about that. That's kind of where aspiration is. Going back to physics and a simple thing, it seems like if you're trying to remove clot with a bigger straw, if you like, sucking a clot out, that the bigger the catheter, the better, right? It would actually remove that clot. This is just a video showing an 0.68 ID catheter trying to remove a clot, and we can see that it's going to fragment a little bit. If you take one of these super large bore, if you take a super large bore catheter, like I'll just let it play. Yeah, there we go. You can see this is an 0.88 catheter as compared to the 0.68 that we see on our left. And you can see a bigger straw vacuums out the clot fairly effectively. So we'll learn a little bit more how that translates into the clinical realm. Are there some concerns? A lot of questions come up. Is it too big? I mean, that's so, is bigger, always better? So that'll be a little bit of, again, what we'll talk about over the course and say, hey, if the direction is going to bigger catheters, what are the limitations, and how do you use those? If you think of still, this is Jiro from a sushi fan point of view. He spent his life trying to perfect how to make the perfect sushi. If we're still trying to perfect how to do the perfect thrombectomy procedure, what we really want in that procedure is that we want to do it first time, so first pass effect. We want to open the vessel 100% of the time, and we want to get complete restoration of the flow, TICI-3 flow. So we're still on a quest. We're not there yet. We have great devices, but this is the ultimate ending spot of what we would love to have from our tools that we use. I'll switch gears a little bit because this is just a little bit of an update on where we are going with thrombectomy. So we talked a little bit on all of the activity and techniques and devices, and that's something we'll talk about over this course. Now in patient selection. So if we look at patients, when we were first doing this, we really focused in on patients that we obviously thought had a chance of making a very good outcome. But now the gates are opening a little bit. So if we look at the early trial work, those trials that I said got published in 2015, what the results of those trials is that we developed guidelines. So if we look at those guidelines, we all are very familiar with these, that we are talking about strokes that occur in the anterior circulation. So in the guidelines, there's no treatment of posterior circulation strokes. If we look at the stroke scale score, it's for somebody with a stroke scale score over 6. So, again, having more and more clinical impact from their stroke. But we all see patients in our day-to-day practice that come in that have a lower stroke scale score, are getting better with their symptoms. What do we do with those patients? It was an aspect score. So on the CT scan, they had to have a low amount of core infarct, at the time that they were going for treatment. But again, we all see patients that have, a moderate-sized infarct already, or even a large infarct in that territory. So, what happens with those patients? And then, this is again early guidelines. It says, we have to treat them within 6 hours. So, since we developed the whole thrombectomy thing, we recognize that, hey, if we were to stick strictly to guidelines, we would only in the real world treat about 15 to 20% of the patients that we encounter. So, real world, there's still a large number of patients that we're trying to figure out on a daily basis with our clinical colleagues, what do we do? Do we go to, treatment or not? So we know that the natural history of this disease left untreated is very, very poor, right? So again, we have a treatment that has a very high treatment effect, a very poor, natural history. And so we've been doing a lot of trial work to expand, all those indications of who do we treat from a patient selection point of view. So the gates are opening more and more beyond what the guidelines, told us. So the fringe patients, I call them, like who are these ones that we don't have guidelines for, fall into these categories. Really, we have, extended time window, beyond 6 hours. So the trials that have addressed that, as we all know, were the DAWN and Diffuse 3 trials that said, hey, yeah, we need to screen patients up to 24 hours, right? So that trial work has kind of been done, and we know that it's obviously now we screen based on more physiology, on perfusion information, that kind of stuff to pick our patients. Posterior circulation strokes weren't included in the early trial work. We're now getting some good trial data from largely from colleagues in Asia who have the case volume, have a lot of ICAD. ICAD is a disease that is very prevalent, as you know, here and in other parts of Asia. And so they're giving us a good contribution on what to do with our posterior circulation patients. We're getting a lot of trial work activity now on going further and further down the tree. The trunk was occluded of the M1. What about the branches? Do we go to M2, M3, or beyond? So we're getting trials that give us guidance on that. We know that there's a lot of trial work, and that's what I'm going to spend a little bit of time on, because these trials are now getting published in the New England Journal, right, of these what we call large core trials. So people that have decent size infarct on their CT scan when they come in. What do we do? Who do we treat? And then low stroke scale score patients, again, those are the trials that are addressing those. So I'm going to show, these images to show that, hey, this disease presents very differently. These are all patients that have an M1 occlusion and come into the hospital the same time from the symptom onset. And these are the different sort of trajectories that these patients or clinical presentations that they can have. So you can have somebody, this patient comes in, and they have a low stroke scale score. If you look, they've got a little core infarct. They have a little bit bigger area that's at risk, but again, it's a relatively small burden of stroke. So they've got a small, if you like, mismatch and a decent overall aspect score. This patient comes in, big stroke scale score, so they've got small core infarct, but a very large penumbral area that's at risk of going on and infarcting. So they have a big mismatch of dead brain to what's at risk. This patient comes in, again, a large stroke scale score, but they already have a relatively big infarct, but they still have more to grow. If we left them untreated, there's still areas that are at risk there. Okay, so they have less of a mismatch. And then we have this patient that comes in and is pretty much all, dead brain. There's no mismatch, no penumbra. So these patients, all M1 occlusions, all same from symptom onset. So as we know in practice, what makes the difference in these patients is their collateral capability. So when you occlude your M1, brain starts to do bypass based on your anatomy. And so it's how well can you tread water during the time period that your M1 is occluded. And people tread water differently or have different collaterals based on their anatomy. And so the early trial work, the stuff that got published in 2015, was all really centered on that patient selection with having small core infarct, big penumbra, so we call that a big mismatch, and that's who we did the trial work on. Trial work right now is going on these patients, the ones that have a low stroke scale score at presentation, or the ones that come in with the larger core infarcts. So, the question is, should we treat those? Where does thrombectomy fit in that? Pretty much, there's agreement on the ones that come in, and it's kind of all a done deal. It's all core infarct. What is the benefit? Although the last trial I'll kind of speak about is one that they just finished in France, got published in the April New England Journal of Medicine, and they enrolled these patients for treatment. With the thought that, hey, this patient is going to obviously have a very large infarct, but does treating them change their likelihood that they're going to die, or do they need a hemicraniectomy? And so, there's also medical issues and considerations in that patient population. So we're all familiar with aspects. I'll just refresh it while we talk about what the kind of inclusion criteria was for a large core infarct. So aspects is that, oops, my timer is going, but aspects is that 10-point scoring system. So you start off as a 10, that's a perfect one. Then you minus off a point for every one of these areas that shows loss of the gray-white differentiation. So a whole bunch of trials looking at these, large core infarct, patients, and we're familiar with it. We remember the guidelines. We said that the guidelines had an aspects of 6 or greater for enrollment. These trials were looking at, okay, what about, the aspects below 6, basically. So a lot of the trials, as you see, enrolled patients with aspects in the 3 to 5 range. Like I said, the one in France enrolled patients with the 0 to 5, 2 to 5. So it was looking at these large core patients. And the first study to get finished was from our colleagues in Japan. They published in 2022 in the New England Journal the results of the rescue study. This was a pretty uniform study done across many sites in Japan. What they used, I'll just show you, it has the usual inclusion criteria for the stroke trials that we've done. But the aspects, again, could be a CT or an MRI aspects of 3 to 5. And then in our early trial work, the marker of a good clinical outcome was an MRS of 0 to 2. Obviously, if you're enrolling patients that have a moderate-sized infarct or even a larger infarct, you know that it's unlikely that they're going to get to independence. You know, they're probably going to have some level of a infarct burden to deal with. So from a good clinical outcome, they shifted it to an MRS of 0 to 3. And so we know that in this, we'll cut right to the chase. Basically, the finding was that if you look at if they didn't receive a thrombectomy EVT, this was their outcomes. And then in the EVT group, there was a shift to improving in that group from MRS 0 to 3. Importantly, if you go down even a little further in the good clinical outcomes, even the MRS of 0 to 2, so people getting back to independence, the study was positive. So patients, with these larger infarcts had a higher likelihood of getting to be independent. And even for excellent clinical outcomes, MRS of 0 and 1, there was a shift and it showed benefit there. So treating those patients and revascularizing improved these patients' outcomes. The big question that always comes up from treatment is, okay, if I have already a decent amount of dead brain and I open that vessel and restore the blood flow, am I going to have more bleeds and more bad bleeds in the brain? So looking at that hemorrhage side, the hemorrhages did increase. We see that there was more hemorrhages on imaging, but the important hemorrhages are the ones that are the big ones that cause a clinical decline, the symptomatic ICHs, and we see that they did increase, but it wasn't clinically significant. So it's an argument to not treat, hey, this patient may have a big bleed, is again, this trial showed that that's not something that should deter us from going on to treating those patients. If we look at all the subsets, we see that basically, if you start asking questions like, does this only apply, should I not treat at a certain age? If someone comes in and they're older, do they not benefit? What about if they had TPA? So if you look, essentially all of the subset analysis shows that patients benefited no matter what subset they were in. And so some of the limitations that they pointed out is that in Japan, they used a high percentage of MRI, and I know here at S.I.S they use MRI 3T as, very routinely to screen patients. Most of our practices, it's a CT-based, screening of patients. So if you're doing an aspect score on MRI, it's much more sensitive, if you like, than doing it on CT. So they said, hey, our inclusion criteria of 3 to 5, if we translated that to CT, that may be more like a 4 to 6, like from an aspects. So that's one thing that they acknowledge. Obviously, a chance that someone could, read the aspects incorrectly from an ER point of view. The treatment assignment was not concealed by patients, so patients and the physicians weren't blinded, obviously, when you're doing a treatment. And then, this was in the Japanese populations. They said maybe it's not transportable to other populations. So then, bottom line conclusions, again, as we said, is that EVT increased independent patients by 2.43 times over medical therapy in these large vessel occlusion patients. Hemorrhage was more frequent, but the symptomatic ICH was not significantly different. Hot off the press is another one of these trials coming in that really shows the same thing. I'm not going to go through all the detail like this. This was from the colleagues in France, who I said went right down to aspects of 0, which most of us would say, wow, I'm not going to put in an aspects of 0 patient in this trial. But they were looking, hey, did that change the death rate? Did that change the hemicraniectomy rate? And I'll just jump right to conclusions. So busy summary slide from the New England Journal publication, but in conclusion, basically they found the same thing as the Japanese colleagues, that there is a treatment effect and benefit, reduction in mortality, and a reduction in the disability in the thrombectomy group versus if you don't do, you just medically treat the patient. So I put this in, get ready. We're going to be doing a lot of work, okay? So we've got young colleagues in the audience who are going to be taking up the torch. The boat ambulance here in Kanto that Dr. Kung has will be even bringing more and more patients in for treatment. I do hope you get a chance to go and enjoy Kenta. It's an amazing city. The floating market is world class. It's such an interesting experience. I got to enjoy it yesterday morning with Dr. Schaff, his son Zach, who's here. We tried a little durian. It was delicious. So if you get a chance to go in the floating market, I highly recommend it. So enjoy your time. Like I said, this is a great time just to interact. I think we're going to learn a lot from each other. And so thank you very much. Come on.
Thank you, Professor Blaise Baxter, for your